He said he was in a meeting, but the hotel camera showed him walking in with someone else. The rain drummed against the windows of Sarah Mitchell's downtown Chicago apartment, each drop echoing the growing unease in her chest. At 32, she had built what she thought was a perfect life, a successful marketing career, a beautiful lakefront apartment, and most importantly, a loving relationship with David, her boyfriend of 3 years. But lately, something felt different. Sarah stared at her phone, reading David's text for the 3rd time. "Sorry, babe. Stuck in another late meeting with the Peterson account. Don't wait up. Love you." The timestamp showed 8:47 p.m. It was the 4th emergency meeting this month, always on Thursdays, always with the Peterson account. As a marketing director herself, Sarah knew that client meetings rarely ran this late, especially not with the same frequency. She walked to her kitchen island, where David's laptop sat forgotten from the previous night. He'd been in such a hurry that morning, rushing out after spilling coffee on his shirt, that he'd left it behind. Sarah wasn't the type to snoop. Trust had always been the foundation of their relationship, but something gnawed at her. The apartment felt unusually quiet, except for the persistent rain. She made herself a cup of tea, trying to shake off the feeling that had been building for weeks. David seemed distant, distracted. Their conversations had become surface level, and their intimate moments felt mechanical, lacking the passion that once defined their relationship. Her phone buzzed, a text from her best friend, Maya. "Girl, you missed trivia night again. Everything okay?" Sarah realized she'd been making excuses, canceling plans, waiting for David to be available. When had she become so dependent on his schedule? The successful, independent woman she'd always been seemed to be fading away. As she sipped her tea, Sarah noticed David's laptop screen was slightly open, the power light still glowing. She approached it hesitantly, just to close it properly, she told herself. But as she lifted the screen, it awakened, displaying his email inbox. Her eyes immediately caught a name that made her stomach drop. Rebecca Chen. Tonight's reservation confirmed. Rebecca was David's assistant at the architectural firm where he worked. Sarah had met her several times at company events. A petite, charming woman in her late 20s with an infectious laugh and striking features. David had always spoken highly of her professionalism, but something about this email felt different. Sarah's hand hovered over the trackpad. She could close the laptop and pretend she never saw anything, preserving the trust she valued so much. Or she could click and potentially shatter the life she'd built with David. The rain intensified outside, mirroring the storm building in her chest. She clicked. The email thread revealed a series of exchanges between David and Rebecca over the past month. Restaurant reservations, hotel bookings, and intimate messages that made Sarah's blood run cold. The most recent one, sent just hours ago, contained an address, the Meridian Hotel, Suite 1247. "See you at 9 p.m. Can't wait to hold you again. R." Sarah's teacup slipped from her hands, shattering against the hardwood floor. The pieces scattered like fragments of her trust, each shard reflecting the harsh reality she could no longer ignore. Her phone showed 9:15 p.m. David had texted about his meeting at 8:47, claiming to be at the office, but the hotel was only 10 minutes from their apartment, in the opposite direction from his workplace. With trembling fingers, Sarah grabbed her car keys. The rain had evolved into a full storm, but she barely noticed as she drove through the empty streets of downtown Chicago. The Meridian Hotel's neon sign glowed through the darkness like a beacon of betrayal. She parked across the street, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it over the rain hammering her windshield. The hotel's glass facade revealed an upscale lobby with warm lighting and elegant furnishings, the kind of place David had taken her for their anniversary last year. Sarah sat in her car for nearly an hour, watching the hotel entrance. Part of her hoped she was wrong, that David would never appear, that there was some innocent explanation for everything. But at 10:23 p.m., she saw him. David emerged from the hotel's revolving door, his hair slightly disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. He wasn't alone. Rebecca walked beside him, her hand briefly touching his arm as they spoke in hushed tones under the hotel's awning. The intimacy of their body language told a story that no words could deny. Sarah watched as David kissed Rebecca's forehead gently before they separated. He toward the parking garage, she toward a waiting taxi. It was a tender gesture, one filled with familiarity and affection, the same gesture he used to reserve for Sarah. As David's BMW pulled out of the garage and disappeared into the rainy night, Sarah remained frozen in her car. The man she loved, The man she'd been planning a future with had just walked out of a hotel with another woman while texting her about a fake business meeting. Her phone buzzed with another message from David. Meeting ran even later than expected. Heading home now. Miss you. The casualness of his lie, delivered so effortlessly while he was probably still thinking about Rebecca, shattered something deep inside Sarah. She started her car and drove home through the storm, each lightning flash illuminating the wreckage of her trust. When she arrived at her apartment, Sarah sat in the parking garage for another 20 minutes, trying to process what she'd witnessed. The building's security cameras had probably captured her leaving and returning. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life fall apart. By the time David's key turned in the lock at 11:47 p.m., Sarah was sitting on their couch, still in her rain-soaked clothes, staring at his laptop screen. The email thread was still open, waiting. "Hey, babe!" David called out, his voice carrying its usual warmth. "Sorry I'm so late. The Peterson account is being incredibly demanding, but I think we finally made some progress." He walked into the living room, loosening his tie, and stopped when he saw Sarah's expression. His eyes moved from her face to the laptop screen, and she watched the color drain from his features. "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of her shattered trust. "Because I just watched you leave the Meridian Hotel with Rebecca." "Your meeting, David?" "I saw your meeting." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rain still battering their window. David stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for words that wouldn't come. In that moment, Sarah realized that their 3-year relationship had been built on a foundation that was far more fragile than she'd ever imagined. David slumped into the armchair across from Sarah, his face pale and drawn. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but inside their apartment, the real tempest was just beginning. "How long?" Sarah's voice was steady now, though her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "Sarah, please let me—" "How long, David?" Her tone cut through his attempt at deflection like a blade. David ran his hands through his hair, the same nervous gesture she'd found endearing for 3 years. Now it just seemed like a tell, a sign of the deception she'd been blind to. 6 months. He whispered, the words barely audible. 6 months. Sarah felt the number hit her like a physical blow. 6 months of lies, 6 months of fake meetings, 6 months of her loving a man who was sharing himself with someone else. She remembered their vacation to Napa Valley 4 months ago, how distracted he'd been, constantly checking his phone. She remembered their discussions about moving in together officially, about marriage, about their future, all while he was building a secret life with Rebecca. Why? The question came out broken, like she was asking it of herself as much as him. David looked up at her, and for the first time in months, she saw genuine emotion in his eye. Not the practiced warmth he'd been showing her, but raw pain and shame. "I don't know," he said, then immediately shook his head. "No, that's not fair to you. That's not an answer." He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights blurred by rain. "We were working late on the Morrison project in March. Rebecca and we'd been putting in 18-hour days, and one night we just connected. It started as just talking, sharing frustrations about work, about life. She understood the pressure I was under in ways that I didn't." Sarah's voice was sharp now. David turned back to her. "You were so focused on your own career, your own success. Every time I tried to talk to you about the stress at work, about feeling like I was drowning, you'd give me advice about time management or suggest I talk to my boss. Rebecca just listened." Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. "So this is my fault because I tried to help you instead of just validating your complaints?" "No, that's not what I'm saying." David's voice rose slightly. Then he caught himself, lowering it again. "I'm not trying to blame you, Sarah. What I did was wrong, completely wrong, but you asked why, and I'm trying to explain." The apartment fell silent again, except for the distant sound of traffic on the wet streets below. Sarah studied the man she'd shared a bed with for 3 years, searching for signs of the person she'd thought she knew. His familiar feature, the stubble he never quite shaved completely, the scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the laugh lines around his eye, now seemed foreign, belonging to a stranger. "Do you love her?" The question surprised Sarah, as much as it seemed to surprise David. He was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Sarah found her answer. "I think I do," he said finally, his honesty somehow more devastating than any lie could have been. Sarah nodded slowly, feeling something cold and final settle in her chest. "Then why are you still here? Why didn't you just leave?" "Because I love you too." David moved toward her, stopping when she held up her hand. "I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. What Rebecca and I have, it's different. It's exciting and new and uncomplicated. But you and I, we built something real. We have history, plans. A life together. Had, Sarah corrected. We had those things. The weight of that past tense hung between them like a physical presence. Sarah thought about the apartment they'd decorated together, the inside jokes they'd developed, the quiet Sunday mornings in bed, the way David used to trace patterns on her back until she fell asleep. All of it felt distant now, like memories from someone else's life. I want to try, David said suddenly. I want to end things with Rebecca and try to work this out with you. What we have is worth fighting for. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw desperation in his eye. But she also saw something else. The same look he'd had when he kissed Rebecca's forehead outside the hotel. He was already mourning that relationship, even as he begged to save this one. You can't love two people the same way, Sarah said quietly, and you can't build a relationship on someone else's ruin. She stood up and walked to the window where David had been standing. Chicago stretched out below them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of choices. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was probably lying awake wondering about her own future with David. Sarah found herself feeling sorry for the other woman who was unknowingly caught in the same web of deception. I need you to leave, Sarah said without turning around. Sarah, please, we can go to counseling. I can change. David, she turned to face him, and he stopped talking when he saw her expression. You've already made your choice. You made it 6 months ago when you decided that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me. You made it every time you lied to my face about where you were. You made it tonight when you texted me about a fake meeting while you were with her. David's shoulders sagged. So that's it? 3 years? And you're just giving up? I'm not giving up, Sarah said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing to believe that I deserve someone who doesn't have to choose between me and someone else. I'm choosing not to spend the rest of my life wondering if you're really where you say you are. David nodded slowly, understanding finally settling in his features. He walked to the couch and picked up his laptop, closing it with a quiet click. I'll pack some things and stay at a hotel tonight, he said. I'll come back for the rest when you're at work, if that's okay. That's fine. He paused at the bedroom door, looking back at her. For what it's worth, I never meant for any of this to happen, and I never meant to hurt you. I know, Sarah said, and she meant it. But you did anyway. After David left, Sarah stood alone in the apartment that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. She walked to the kitchen and carefully picked up the pieces of the broken teacup, disposing of them in the trash. Some things, once shattered, couldn't be put back together. She made herself another cup of tea and sat on the couch, pulling out her phone. Maya had texted again. Rain stop. Beautiful rainbow over the lake. Hope your night got better. Sarah looked out the window and saw it. A faint rainbow arcing over Lake Michigan, barely visible in the early morning light. She'd been so focused on the storm that she'd missed the moment when it ended. She typed back to Maya. It did. Want to grab breakfast? I have some news to share. As she waited for Maya's response, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. The pain was still there, sharp and immediate, but underneath it was something else. Relief. Relief from pretending everything was fine, relief from second-guessing her instincts, relief from carrying the weight of a relationship that had been slowly dying without her knowing it. Her phone buzzed with Maya's reply. Always? Pancakes and 20? Perfect, Sarah typed back. She went to the bedroom to change clothes, noticing how the space already felt different without David's presence. His cologne no longer lingered in the air, and his side of the bed looked neat and undisturbed. On his nightstand, he'd left his spare key to the apartment. As Sarah got dressed, she made a mental list of practical things she'd need to handle: changing the locks, canceling their joint gym membership, dividing their shared streaming accounts. The logistics of untangling a life would take time, but each step would move her closer to rebuilding something that was entirely her own. By the time she left to meet Maya, the sun had broken through the remaining clouds, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. Sarah walked with purpose, her phone buzzing with a text from David. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me. She read the message but didn't reply. Forgiveness might come eventually, but it wouldn't come today, and it wouldn't come in the form of salvaging their relationship. Today was about moving forward, about rediscovering who she was without David, about building something new from the pieces he'd left behind. At the cafe, Maya was already waiting with a concerned expression that melted into surprise when she saw Sarah's face. You look different, Maya said as Sarah sat down. Tired, but I don't know. Stronger? Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months it felt completely genuine. I have a lot to tell you. As she began to share the story of her shattered relationship and her newfound clarity, Sarah realized that some betrayals, while devastating, could also be gifts. David's lies had freed her from a future built on false foundations, giving her the chance to construct something authentic and true. The road ahead would be challenging, but it would be hers to travel, and for the first time in 6 months, that felt like enough. 3 weeks had passed since that stormy night that changed everything. Sarah had settled into a new rhythm, one that felt foreign, yet liberating. The apartment, now entirely hers, had been rearranged to erase the traces of David's presence. She'd bought new throw pillows, moved furniture around, and even painted an accent wall in a deep emerald green that David had always vetoed. It was a crisp Saturday morning in early November when Sarah decided to treat herself to brunch at Wildberry Cafe in the Loop. She'd been avoiding their usual spot, but today felt different. Today, she was ready to reclaim the places she'd loved before Dave, the places that belonged to her Chicago experience. She was scrolling through her phone, reading weekend news while waiting for her table, when a familiar voice made her look up. Sarah? Rebecca Chen stood a few feet away, looking as surprised as Sarah felt. She wore a casual weekend outfit, jeans and a cream-colored sweater, but there was something different about her appearance. She looked tired, and her usual confident posture seemed diminished. "Rebecca," Sarah replied, her voice neutral. She hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't rehearsed what she'd say if she encountered the other woman. An awkward silence stretched between them as other customers moved around them in the busy restaurant entrance. Rebecca glanced toward the exit, clearly considering escape, but then seemed to make a decision. Could we talk?" Rebecca asked hesitantly. "I know you probably hate me, but there are things I think you should know." Sarah studied Rebecca's face, searching for signs of manipulation or false sincerity. Instead, she saw genuine distress and something that looked like regret. Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself nodding. "There's a coffee shop across the street. It's quieter," Sarah suggested. 10 minutes later, they sat across from each other at a small table in Corner Bakery, two women connected by the same man's deception. Rebecca stared into her coffee cup, as if it might provide the words she needed. "I didn't know," Rebecca said finally. "Not at first. David told me you two had broken up months before anything happened between us." Sarah felt a familiar stab of anger, but it was directed at David, not the woman across from her. "When did you find out the truth?" "2 weeks ago." Rebecca looked up, her eyes reflecting a pain Sarah recognized all too well. "I went to surprise him at his apartment, your apartment, with dinner. I still had the key he'd given me. When I let myself in, I saw the photos on the walls, your things everywhere. It was so obviously a shared space." Sarah remembered that Thursday evening. David had texted about another late meeting, but he'd seemed agitated when he came home, claiming the Peterson account was being impossible. Now she understood why. "When I confronted him about it," Rebecca continued, "he admitted that you two were still together. He said he was planning to break up with you but needed time to figure out how to do it gently. He said he loved us both, but in different ways, and he was trying to find the right solution." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Even in his confession to Rebecca, David had been crafting narratives, managing both women's emotions while serving his own interests. "Did you believe him?" Sarah asked. Rebecca shook her head. "I wanted to. God, I wanted to believe that he was just a good man in a difficult situation, but something about the way he said it felt practiced, like he'd been rehearsing the explanation." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, processing this new information. "What did you do?" "I ended it," Rebecca said quietly. "That night, I told him I couldn't be with someone who would lie to someone he claimed to love for months. If he could deceive you so completely, what was he capable of doing to me?" Sarah felt an unexpected surge of respect for Rebecca. In that moment, she realized that they had both been victims of David's inability to make difficult choices honestly. "I'm sorry," Rebecca continued. "I know that doesn't fix anything, and I know you have every right to hate me, but I needed you to know that I never would have started anything with him if I'd known the truth." Sarah studied Rebecca's face, the genuine remorse, the exhaustion that came from having your world reorganized by someone else's lies. She thought about the anger she'd been carrying, the way she'd imagined Rebecca as a calculating homewrecker rather than another woman who'd been manipulated. "I don't hate you," Sarah said, surprising herself with the honesty. "I hate what happened, and I hate that David put us both in this position. But you're not the villain in this story." Rebecca's shoulders sagged with relief. "I've been carrying this guilt for weeks. I keep thinking about how I contributed to hurting someone I didn't even know. You were lied to just as much as I was," Sarah pointed out, maybe differently. "But David made choices that affected both of our lives without giving us the information we needed to make our own choices." They sat in contemplative silence for a moment, watching the Saturday morning foot traffic through the cafe window. Chicago was waking up around them. Families heading to Lincoln Park Zoo, couples browsing the farmer's market, friends meeting for weekend adventure, life continuing in its messy, complicated way. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said hesitantly. Sarah nodded. What was he like? With you, I mean. Was he always evasive? Sarah considered the question carefully. No, actually. For the first 2 years, he was incredibly present and honest. Or at least I thought he was. Looking back, I wonder if I was just seeing what I wanted to see. He made me feel like I was the most fascinating person in the world, Rebecca admitted. Like everything I said was brilliant or funny or important. I've never felt that seen by someone. Sarah recognized the feeling. David had that gift, the ability to make you feel like you were the center of his universe. She'd experienced it in their early days. That intoxicating sensation of being completely understood and valued. I think that's what made it so hard to see the red flags, Sarah said. When someone makes you feel that special, you want to believe it's real. Rebecca nodded emphatically. Exactly. And the sneaking around almost felt romantic at first, like we were protecting something precious from a world that wouldn't understand. When really, we were just protecting David from having to face the consequences of his choices, Sarah concluded. How are you doing now? Rebecca asked. I mean, really, not the polite answer you'd give to acquaintances. Sarah thought about the question honest. Some days are harder than others. I go through periods where I miss him terribly, and then I remember what it felt like to discover the truth, and I remember why I made the choice I made. But overall, I think I'm doing better than I expected. I'm struggling more than I thought I would, Rebecca admitted. I know I only knew him for 6 months, but it felt so intense. And now I'm questioning everything about my judgment, my ability to read people. Sarah recognized that particular spiral of self-doubt. I went through that too, but I realized that David is exceptionally good at being what people need him to be. That's not a failure on our part. That's a skill he's developed, probably unconsciously. Rebecca looked thoughtful. You know what's strange? I'm almost grateful this happened now rather than later. Can you imagine if I'd found out after we'd moved in together or gotten engaged? I think about that too, Sarah said. What if I'd married him? What if we'd had children? The betrayal would have been so much more complicated. They finished their coffees as the conversation naturally wound down. When they stood to leave, Rebecca hesitated. I know this might sound weird, but would you be interested in staying in touch? Not as friends necessarily, but I don't know. You're the only person who really understands what this experience was like. Sarah considered the offer. A few weeks ago, she would have been horrified by the suggestion, but sitting across from Rebecca, seeing her humanity and her own pain, Sarah felt something unexpected. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of solidarity. I think I'd like that, Sarah said. Maybe we can text occasionally, check in on each other. They exchanged phone numbers, and as they prepared to part ways on the sidewalk, Rebecca turned back. For what it's worth, I think David made the wrong choice. You seem like someone worth fighting for, worth choosing clearly and completely. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from an unexpected sense of validation. Thank you. That means more than you know. As Sarah walked back to her apartment, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, Rebecca had been the faceless other woman, the symbol of everything wrong with her relationship. Today, she'd become something more complex, another human being trying to navigate the aftermath of someone else's poor choices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. How was brunch? Did you try the lemon ricotta pancakes? Sarah smiled and typed back. Change of plans, but it was exactly what I needed. Tell you about it later. She realized that healing wasn't just about moving past David. It was about reconstructing her understanding of what had happened, finding complexity where she'd previously seen only betrayal, and discovering that sometimes the people you expect to hate might be the ones who understand you best. The afternoon sun felt warm on her face as she walked through downtown Chicago, a city that was beginning to feel like hers again rather than theirs. And for the first time since that stormy night 3 weeks ago, Sarah felt genuinely curious about what might come next. 2 months after her conversation with Rebecca, Sarah was settling into her Saturday morning routine when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something prompted her to answer. Sarah? It's Rebecca. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Sarah could hear tension in Rebecca's voice, the kind that suggested this wasn't a casual check-in call. Of course. Is everything all right? I need to tell you something, Rebecca said. About David. I didn't know whether I should, but I keep thinking about our conversation at the cafe, about how we both deserve to know the truth. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She'd been doing so well, moving forward, building a life that didn't revolve around David's betrayal. What is it? He's been trying to contact me. Texts, calls, showing up at my work. He says he made a mistake choosing you over me. that he realizes now that what we had was real love. Rebecca paused. Sarah, he's been telling me that you two broke up because you couldn't forgive him, and that he's been mourning our relationship ever since. The audacity of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. Even now, months later, David was rewriting history to serve his narrative. Rebecca, you know that's not— I know, Rebecca interrupted. I know it's not true, but there's more. He said he never loved you the way he loved me, that your relationship had been over emotionally long before I came into the picture. He's painting himself as some kind of romantic hero who sacrificed his true love for duty. Sarah walked to her living room window, looking out at Lake Michigan. The water was choppy today, reflecting her inner turmoil. How are you handling it? I'm not responding to him, Rebecca said firmly. But Sarah, I think he's going to try to contact you too. He asked me if I knew how you were doing, if I thought you'd moved on. There was something calculating about the way he asked. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text notification. Her blood ran cold when she saw David's name. Hey, I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking about us a lot lately. Can we talk? He just texted me, Sarah told Rebecca, reading the message aloud. He's testing the waters, Rebecca said, trying to figure out if either of us might take him back. I wanted to warn you before he started his campaign. Sarah felt a familiar anger rising, but this time it was cleaner, more focused. Thank you for telling me. And Rebecca, I'm proud of you for not responding to him. After they hung up, Sarah stared at David's text for a long time. 6 months ago, receiving this message would have thrown her into emotional chaos. 3 months ago, it would have triggered a spiral of self-doubt. Now, it felt like an insult to her intelligence. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Maya. Girl, you will not believe what just happened, Maya said without preamble. I ran into David at Whole Foods, and he cornered me asking about you. Wanted to know if you were dating anyone, if you seemed happy. All kinds of inappropriate questions. Sarah sank onto her couch. Let me guess. He seemed concerned about my well-being? Exactly. He had this whole sad guy act going. Said he was worried about you, that he'd made mistakes, but he was hoping you could find your way back to each other eventually. Maya's voice was sharp with irritation. I told him you were thriving and that he should leave you alone. What did he say to that? He got this look on his face, like he was calculating something. Then he asked if thriving meant you were seeing someone new. When I wouldn't answer, he said he hoped you weren't rushing into anything as a way to avoid dealing with your feelings about him. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. Sarah could picture David's expression, the practiced concern that masked his real agenda. He wanted information, wanted to know if she was vulnerable to his approach. That evening, Sarah's doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery person holding an elaborate bouquet of white roses, her former favorite flower, the ones David used to surprise her with during their first year together. The card read, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't stop hoping. Everything reminds me of the best parts of us. D. Sarah took the flowers from the delivery person and walked directly to the garbage chute in her building's hallway. As the bouquet disappeared into the darkness, she felt a sense of finality that surprised her with its clarity. Her phone buzzed again. Did you get my flowers? I know it's presumptuous, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. Instead of ignoring the message, Sarah decided to respond. She needed to make something absolutely clear. David, I got the flowers. I also know you've been contacting Rebecca and asking my friends about me. This behavior is inappropriate and needs to stop. We're not getting back together. We're not even having a conversation about it. Please respect my boundaries and my choice to move forward without you in my life. Her phone rang almost immediately. David's name appeared on the screen, and she could imagine his surprise that his romantic gesture had been met with such firm rejection. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Sarah, please don't shut me out like this. I know I hurt you, but what we had was real. I've had time to think, to grow, to understand what I lost. I'm not the same person who made those mistakes. Can't we at least talk? 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes to explain how much I've changed. The message triggered something in Sarah. Not longing or curiosity, but a crystalline understanding of who David really was. He wasn't calling because he'd genuinely changed or because he'd realized he couldn't live without her. He was calling because his other option hadn't worked out, because Rebecca had seen through his manipulation, because he couldn't tolerate the idea that Sarah had moved on without him. She called Rebecca. He left me a voicemail, Sarah said when Rebecca answered, all about how much he's changed and grown. About how real what we had was. He's been sending me emails, Rebecca said. Long, philosophical ones about the nature of love and making mistakes. He keeps saying that our connection was once in a lifetime, that he's never felt anything like it before or since. So he's telling both of us that we were his great love, Sarah said. Do you think he believes it? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I think he believes whatever version serves him in the moment. When he was with you, you were his great love. When he was with me, I was his great love. Now that neither of us is available, we're both his great love. That's actually really sad, Sarah said, surprising herself. To live that way, never really connecting with anyone because you're always performing a version of yourself. It is sad, Rebecca agreed, but it's not our job to fix him or help him figure out who he really is. They talked for another hour, comparing David's recent messages and tactics. What emerged was a clear picture of a man who had learned nothing from losing both of them, who was treating their breakups as problems to be solved rather than consequences to be accepted. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find 3 more texts from David, each escalating in emotional intensity. The last one read, "I can't accept that we're really over. What we had was too important to throw away over one mistake. I'm willing to fight for us." Sarah screenshot the messages and sent them to Rebecca, who responded with her own screenshot. "I keep dreaming about you. I know you felt what I felt. That kind of connection doesn't just disappear. Identical playbook," Rebecca texted back. Sarah realized that David's return wasn't really about wanting her back. It was about wanting to win. He couldn't accept that both women had chosen to walk away from him. His ego couldn't survive the narrative that he was someone worth leaving. That afternoon, Sarah made 2 important calls. First, she called a locksmith to change her apartment locks again, even though David had returned his keys months ago. Something about his recent behavior made her want that extra security. Second, she called her building's front desk to put David's name on a list of people who should not be given access to her floor. As she hung up from the second call, Sarah realized something profound. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't hurt or confused or longing for closure. She was simply done. Her phone rang one more time that day. David's name appeared on the screen, and instead of letting it go to voicemail, Sarah answered. "David." "Sarah, thank God. I was starting to think you were never going to talk to me. I'm talking to you now to tell you that I need you to stop contacting me. Stop texting, stop calling, stop sending flowers, stop asking my friends about me, and stop harassing Rebecca." "Harassing? Sarah, You're trying to manipulate us into giving you another chance, and it's not going to work. Rebecca and I have talked, David. We know about your identical messages to both of us. We know you're telling each of us that we were your one true love." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if he'd hung up. "You've been talking to Rebecca?" His voice had changed, the practiced warmth replaced by something sharper. "We've become friends, actually. Turns out we have a lot in common." Sarah found herself smiling as she said it. "We both deserve better than someone who thinks love is a performance." "Sarah, you're making a mistake. What we had was real for me," Sarah interrupted. "But it wasn't real for you, because you're not capable of that level of authenticity. And I'm okay with that now. I'm actually grateful that I found out who you really are before I wasted any more time." She ended the call and immediately blocked David's number. Then she sent a text to Rebecca. "Just blocked him. How do you feel about getting dinner tonight and celebrating our freedom?" Rebecca's response came back immediate. "I thought you'd never ask. I know the perfect place." As Sarah got ready to meet Rebecca for dinner, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had discovered David's betrayal 4 months ago. Her posture was straighter, her eyes clearer. She looked like someone who knew her own worth. That evening, over Italian food and red wine, Sarah and Rebecca laughed about David's transparent tactics and marveled at how different their lives felt without his manipulation. They talked about their careers, their family, their dreams for the future. They discovered they both loved hiking and had always wanted to visit New Zealand. "You know what's funny?" Rebecca said as they walked back to their cars. "I spent so much time thinking about the woman David was hiding me from, imagining you as some kind of perfect girlfriend who had everything I wanted, but you're just human, complicated and smart and funny and flawed like the rest of us." "Same," Sarah said. "I turned you into this mythical other woman who must have been everything I wasn't, but you're just someone trying to figure out life, same as me." As they hugged goodbye, Sarah realized that David's betrayal had inadvertently given her something precious, a friendship with someone who understood her experience in a way no one else could. They had both emerged from the wreckage of his deception, stronger and more self-aware. Walking to her car, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. David would probably continue trying to contact them for a while, would probably cycle through anger and bargaining and false acceptance before finally moving on to his next targets. But that was his journey to take. Hers was just beginning.